The Angels have to make a big decision about Shohei Ohtani. Meanwhile, health made a decision for the Cleveland Guardians.
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. I'm an Emmy-nominated television producer who has been a baseball podcaster for over a decade. And once a week, I do a crossover with Locked On Diamondbacks, which means my co-host for today is
Miller Thomas, host of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. You catch me on Twitter at CreatorThomas24 for my personal account. Look up Locked On Diamondbacks about Twitter, Instagram for the podcast handle. And please hit subscribe on the Locked On Diamondbacks YouTube channel, because for the YouTube audience, if you see different background for me today, because this is the hometown crossover for Sully and I, both of us back in our hometowns as we, grew up in as little children, little kids.
Well, for me, not as little kids. I'm in the house where I was at during my high school years in Palo Alto. As a little kid, I was in Massachusetts, but then we moved to Palo Alto. And then this is the house that is still my mother's house up here in Palo Alto. By the way, this episode of Locked On MLB and Locked On Diamondbacks is brought to you by eBay Motors. A championship team is about each player being the perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. So for parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check. Stay in the game with eBay Motors, guaranteed fit. ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit is available only to U.S. customers. Sorry, Canada. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Yeah, I'm up here in the Bay Area. I'm in my mom's home for the next few weeks. You're in Jersey. Where did you
the
grow up in Jersey?
Back in Central Jersey. Central Jersey for the people out there.
Jersey.
I don't know if I got any New Jerseys out there. Yeah, Central Jersey, because there's a whole debate, Central, North, South. Central Jersey does exist for the people out there who care about the East Coast debate. I know it's probably like 3% of y'all, but the people who do care, Central Jersey does exist.
Are you near Princeton? Are you kind of near Princeton at all, or am I?
Yeah, kind of near. It's like 35 minutes. Okay. We hang out there sometimes. They got some really nice restaurants out there.
Trying to get the ballpark. Anyway, hey, before we get going here, we had a trivia question, and because I did 2 episodes back to back, the trivia question kind of bled over to the next one. So we had the question was, who is the only pitcher in baseball history with 200 wins and 150 saves? And I said that when I saw that trivia question, I actually got it wrong. So I thought it may be an interesting trivia question. And a bunch of you did get it right. Craig Brindle, who is my go-to getting it right all the time, did indeed get it right. Court Stell, you got it right. Chris Bonner, another listener, Kyle King, a couple of Bill Jacobson. We got a bunch of people because it was on there for a couple of days. Amy Green, who always gets them right. I got to get Craig and Amy Green going head-to-head in trivia. The answer, let me throw it to you, Millard. Who is the only player with 200 wins and 150 career saves?
Man, I feel like the answer is probably on the tip of my tongue, but I don't got one right now, and I don't want to sound dumb on the podcast, so I'm not even going to guess. So what is the answer, Sully?
I guessed Dennis Eckersley because he was an all-star starter for a long time, then became an elite closer. But the answer was John Smoltz. And John Smoltz obviously had many, many years as a dominant starting pitcher. And there was a period of time after he had an injury at the beginning of the 2000s that he missed the entire 2000 season. And they brought him back as a relief pitcher. And it turns out he was really good as a relief pitcher. And then they converted him back to being a starting pitcher. There's one of the great ironies about that Braves run because they had 3 Hall of Fame starting pitchers. Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine, John Smoltz. Greg Maddux was not on the team when they won the pennant in 91, 92, but by the time he arrived in 93 as a free agent, in one of the 3 greatest free agent signings of all time. Braves signing Greg Maddux, Diamondbacks signing Randy Johnson, Giants signing Barry Bonds. Those are the 3 greatest free agent signings in history, in my humble opinion. And when Maddox came over and and there are other great ones to be sure. But those 3 are the ones where what they brought to the team, like for the excellence over the next decade or so, was so astonishing. But the problem with when they went on that great run that they played, and I have to phrase this carefully, they played in every postseason between 1991 and 2005. There was a year where there was no postseason because of a strike. So they played in every postseason from that stretch. And they only won the World Series once because they played Cleveland. But a lot of people, if you look at many of those years, there was always a critical meltdown of their closer. And they went through closers like Kleenex. And like it was every year, with the exception of Mark Wohlers, who had a very good year as a closer. That was the one year that they clinched the World Series. But the next year, Wohlers, had a meltdown in the World Series. And the ironic thing is they had John Smoltz, who turned out to be a wonderful closer. And I have made the case that in a lot of those years, don't worry, we'll get to the topics we planned for in a second. In many of those years, their number 4 starter was as good as most people's ace or number 2 starter. They had Charlie Liebrandt, they had Steve Avery, they had Denny Nagel, they had Kevin Millwood. They had all these players who would be like the ace of another team, and he was buried as the number 4 starter on Atlanta. And I have said that if they had gone the entire year, Glavine, Maddox, Smoltz, and then when they got to the postseason, have that solid pitcher go in the number 3 hole and John Smoltz be the closer, I think they would have won a couple more World Series. I have no evidence to back that up, except the fact that John Smoltz turned out to be a spectacular closer. That
would have been incredible. The 2 guys that I was thinking of as potential answers was Ryan Dempster and Derek Lowe, just because I knew they both split time between starting.
Derek Lowe is a great answer. Derek Lowe is a really great answer, because Derek Lowe, by the way, had one of the strangest careers I've ever seen in my life. Because as a Red Sox fan following Derek Lowe, every single time I felt like I could count on him, he would fall apart. And every time I totally gave up on him, he became an all-star. There was no rhyme or reason to Derek Lowe's career. And it was so appropriate. His final appearance as a Red Sox was winning the game that clinched the World Series. And then he left as a free agent. I said, good. I want that to be my last memory of him. My last memory. Quit when we're ahead. He wound up going to Los Angeles.
Go out on top.
Go out on top. Hey, speaking of pitchers and teams maybe going out on top, Shane Bieber, who is the ace of the Cleveland Guardians, is on the injured list right now. And with that move, now look at he's put to the 10-day IL, but it's not. Those are never. It's rarely steadfast. Okay, they'll be back in exactly 10 days. Up until that point, there were a lot of rumors about Shane Bieber being on the trade block, even though Cleveland was in first place by themselves during the All-Star break. As we record this, Cleveland is 2 games under 500, but only 1 game back in the loss column of first place. In some ways, I think this is going to help Cleveland, because they do have a very good pitching staff even without Bieber, and this prevents them from trading him at the deadline. Right now, the Minnesota Twins are 1 game above 500 and in first place by themselves. This is an incredibly winnable division, and I think that having Bieber on the injured list means they won't trade him, which means they're going to go down the stretch still with a shot to win this division.
Yeah, with a shot, but I don't know. If you're the Guardians this year, do you just kind of maybe say, this is not my year with the Beavers going on the injured list? McKenzie's been out your rotation the entire season. Maybe you're not going into this deadline saying, it's a fire sale, we're trading all our players away, but maybe you just kind of stand pat and just maybe if there's like an old veteran that you have on your roster that's like, let's go send him to a playoff team for this season so he can make a run. And we just kind of stand pat so he can retool in the offseason, just get healthy, because it's just not our year with the way injuries have been breaking down.
I think the exact opposite. in some way. I don't think they should do a fire sale, nor do I think they should push in all their prospects for a rental. But I do think they should treat this like going to the bargain bin at Target. And if there are teams, like the Rockies are going to have a bunch of players they're probably going to jettison because, players are probably going to non-tender, or players on the Royals, or players on, on Washington. What Cleveland, and it's funny, Cleveland and the New York Yankees have very similar needs right now. They just need a professional hitter in that lineup. If the Guardians had just one or two, now I'm not talking stars. I'm not talking getting Ronald Acuna Jr. I'm talking, Randall Grichuk is someone I look at like, put him in the lineup.
Mm-hmm.
Is he going to cost you your top prospect? Of course not. CJ Cron is not going to pick your top prospect, but CJ Cron is a veteran who is capable, and say, hey, you're on a contender. Give us 2 decent months. And 2 times, 3 or 4 times during the game, his spot in the lineup will come out, and where he's not an automatic out. And maybe you'll get that little burst of energy. Cleveland needs that desperately, because even with McKenzie out, even with Bieber out, they've got good pitching. And this is an extraordinarily winnable division. And we've learned the teams that surprise in the postseason a lot of times are the ones that have the pitching depth more than the big sluggers. Do I think Cleveland's going to win the World Series this year? No, I don't. But we've seen the last bunch of years, at least in the National League, surprise teams sort of get through there, and it's usually been because of their pitching depth. So, I think Cleveland, I picked Minnesota to win the division this year, and as of this recording, they're in first place, but they're only a game above 500. You don't have to play remarkable baseball to punch your ticket. And, at this point, you got to say, well, again, I don't touch any of your top prospects. You're not going to try to pull off an Ohtani trade. But I would also just sort of go, who are you going to non-tender? And you're just better off getting a minor leaguer instead of non-tendering and getting nothing. That's what I think they should be doing.
Yeah, I actually don't mind that philosophy. Just because looking at their roster, that they're so young, they really don't even have like the veteran that you would want to even just like, you know what, it's not our year. We'll just trade him off to go get a piece back. They really even don't even have that guy that's like 35, 36 on their roster that would want to play for a championship team. Like this whole team is like 30 and younger. So I actually don't mind if there's like an impending free agent out there that maybe is struggling a little bit. Someone, if this was like Cody Bellinger on the Dodgers last season, if someone like that was out there, you're like, you know what, he's going to be a free agent. He's going to, let's go see what, let's go bring him to Cleveland. Let's see if he could turn it around for a few months. Let's bring him in the building, see what he has. And if he can turn it around with a change of scenery, then you know what, we'll give him a 2-year, 3-year extension for a little money. And he can help us build the team for next season to help build that new playoff roster. So I actually don't mind that philosophy for Cleveland to maybe go out there and look at the rental market for guys that you maybe want to sign to long-term or short-term deals going forward.
And selfishly, that player may increase their value if they play well down the stretch for a contender. That just has to be the way that it goes.